This video is all about workflow between Zbrush, Modo using GoZ, and the ACS kit for Modo, which is a plugin that enables us to quickly rig a character. The end result is that we want to have a fully rigged character and to be able to pose a character and send that pose back to Zbrush, returning all of its subdivisional history so that we can work on other sculpts from that particular mesh. There is a number of problems that I come across when trying to initially do this. One of those problems is being scale. Scale can be an issue between Modo and Zbrush. And the reason why that is because in Modo things work much better if they're real world scale. A 5'9" character would be working better in Modo as really 5'9" according to the measurements. Whereas in Zbrush they're much more larger by default. The meshes are quite large. What you can't do is you can't send a very large mesh into Modo by GoZ and then scale it down and then send it back to Zbrush with GoZ, expecting everything to work as before, because it simply won't happen. Zbrush won't be able to adapt to this. And what you'll find is you'll find that a lot of the subdivisional history will be exploded. It'll be far more dense in the details that you've added to it. It'll look very bloated. And also you'll find that the brush size of one will be quite large, more like the size of a, say, 12 or 13. So with that said, there's a few things that I found that work very well when trying to work out how to get a good workflow between Modo and Zbrush. And the first thing is that you want to get your base mesh down as best that you possibly can. It doesn't really matter about the UVs to this particular point, but if you can get the UVs done at this particular stage that you see my model that I've been working on, then at least you've got less to worry about later on. But if you feel that you're not sure whether the shoulders or the knees got enough geometry or the right geometry for deformation, then you may want to hold off doing the UVs in case you lose them. In any particular case, what I like to do is I like to get the scale of the mesh initially done within Modo and then send it from Modo into Zbrush as a brand new project. Sometimes if you've been working on a project for a while, you may find that the GoZ data cache is still available and it can mess up some of your intentions. So if that's the case, you may want to go to the preferences in Zbrush, go to the GoZ menu here, and you can see here that clear cache files, and that will do exactly that. It will actually clear all the cache files between the applications. So I'm going to do that right now. So let's say, for instance, I've worked on this purely in Zbrush for quite a while, and I've made it with Z spheres, and that character was massive. What I would do is I would work on the base mesh for as minimal as I can to get the forms done. I wouldn't take it any further than the stage that you see right now. And I would normally have it even a lower polygon model than what you see now. In fact, this was a lower polygon model. This is just a level which I feel happy to be animated. Then I would take it into Modo as an example, scale it down in Modo, and then I would send it for the first time using GoZ to Zbrush. This way Zbrush is going to be able to work with the scale, and you'll find that when you take the draw size down to 1, it is very small. Do it the other way around by sending it from Zbrush to Modo, then Modo to Zbrush, with scaling in between, then you get the issues. So on the assumption that we've worked on this from a Z sphere upwards and that the scale is probably going to be too large, I'm going to send this right now using GoZ to Modo. So it's coming to Modo now, and that's just checking to see how big of this scale is. By default, the ACS is pretty much on scale with the way that Modo likes to be working within a real world scale. So I'm going to go to the setup, you can see animate or setup. And from this tab, we've got the ACS. And from presets, we've got this bibed character here. We just drag that in there. And this will enable us to see the scale difference between one and the other. Okay, you can clearly see here that the scale of the character that I've imported is much larger than that of the rig that we want to scale it to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this all the way down. Make sure that I select all the geometry. Move this roughly in place and to scale of the rig. When you've finally scaled it down, you're better off to go back to the preferences, clear the cache, and then do a GoZ, selecting all of the components that you want to send back, making sure that the body, the eyes, and any accessories. So it's going to send it back now as an entirely new project which isn't associated with the file that we originally sent back. You notice that if I take the draw size right down, it does go down very small, you can see there. If the GoZ original cache was there and I press GoZ back, then it wouldn't be reacting like this at all. Another way to do that, if you wanted to keep the GoZ cache, is to rename these file names here and then select GoZ, and it will send it back as if it's a fresh project. Next stage is to apply a preset which is closer to the type of figure that you've got, and then manipulate the joints into place. As you can see here, that's exactly what I've done. I've put all of the bones in the right places, exactly where I want them. And once I've done this, then I'm ready to move on to the next step. Of course, this video isn't to cover how the rigging process is done, but needless to say that you want to make sure that all parts of your geometry all have their center pivot points where they should be. Otherwise, you're going to be having lots of issues later on. So you need to make sure that each individual part has got its pivot center point where it should be, so that when you actually apply all of these joints into the say for instance that joint to the eye, then it's going to be put in the correct and right place first time, and you won't have any issues. Also make sure that everything is zeroed off in the items. You can see here that the eyes and the main mesh of the body is all zeroed off, and it's the right scale the way it should be as well. Once you've finally applied the rig, then the next thing that I would do is just test to see how the mesh is deforming, to see where I need to adjust the weights, and if I need to add any more edge loops or change the geometry. So I create a little tiny small sequence so it kind of puts the mesh through its paces, just to see how well it initially deforms. Okay, so we can clearly see that it's got some issues when the arms come out. You can see there. So I just need to go and work on that to see if I can get that all sorted. So for that I'll just go to the weighting and see if I can sort out the weighting issues. Now the next step is to be able to create a pose for this character, and so I'm going to just move forward to another frame to create a specific pose. I'm not going to do anything fancy, just so that we can demonstrate exactly how we can work with this. So we're going to create a somewhat contrapposto to something very basic. Okay, so let's say we want to keep this particular pose here, and we want to work on this for a sculpt. And there's not really anything fancy here really, but it kind of gets the point across. Relax those fingers a little bit, I think. What we want to do is we want to go to the character setup here, go to bind meshes, and then select this character here, and we're going to right click. In fact, not just for that, we're going to do it for the eyes as well. So the rigid meshes, it will be in there. We select these and we will right click and we will duplicate. Now you'll have two versions of the same model. They're both going to be transformed by the rig at the moment, and you see that the copy has got the brackets with a 2 in it. If we've already been working with GoZ at this particular point between Zbrush and Modo, there's going to be a data cache between the two, in which case we need to keep the name convention the same. And so what we do is we just grab the original ones, you can see there, the ones that haven't been renamed, and I believe that one would be that as well. And we just drag them and put them back into the original folder that the GoZ came from. You can see here, and you should have a GoZ for the eyes as well, left and right. So we'll just grab that. In this particular case I haven't, because I've deleted all the cache file anyway, but we we can still take it through the same process. Now you notice that when I drag the right eye and the left eye out, you can see here that it kind of deforms and it's kind of lost its place. I find that the best way to avoid this happening is to go into Setup, and then drag it down, and then when we come out of Setup, you can see that the eyes have remained applied. So now that I've done that, I'm going to turn off the character. So now we just see the posed model. And as I said, if you've already been working with GoZ before, then you'll see the folders, and you want to put these into the correct folders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these and the items selection. In fact, you only have to do it with the model. These rigid meshes you don't have to freeze, but only the binded mesh you do have to freeze. So you click on that and you go to geometry and then freeze. Now just before I freeze there, I've noticed that I've actually got the smoothing turned on. I don't want the smoothing turned on when this happens, so I'm just going to press the tab key to make sure there's no smoothing applied. Same for the eyes as well. Geometry, freeze, and freeze. This has done two things. The first thing that it's done is it's actually kept this posed model exactly where it is, and it's ready to send back using GoZ. But also what it's done, if I turn off these eyes and the character that we've just done frozen, you'll notice that the character has now lost its bind to the skeleton, but it's not a permanent problem. It's only a temporary problem. To get it back, what we do is we go back to the first frame in which we've got the original stance there, and we go right back to here, and what we do is we go to the meshes and deformation, we hold down and we click on backup weights. This is very important that we do this. 152 weight maps were backed up, so then we click OK. And then we go to the same menu again, we click on unbind, we unbind it, and then we go to bind it again with normalize, and use the same kind of bind that you did before. I'm going to go for the distance one. And what should happen is you should see a dialog box coming up saying a complete set of weight maps have been found. Do you want to restore them and override the current bind? Well, because we've stored those, we've actually backed them up, we click yes, and then what it does is it restores the rig back to posing again. So now what happens is if I move forward for the timeline, just wait until it completes it, you'll see that we've still got the character set up ready to perform more poses. I'll just show you, you can see here. Everything is exactly as we've set it up with the weighting. So we haven't lost the rig for the character. We can then just turn off that for now. And if we go back to our, you can see there, the model has kept its pose, the eyes haven't. This is because the eyes do not have to be frozen. All we have to do is move to the keyframe in which we stored. And go back to the character again. We should be able to see all the keyframes. I believe it was up here somewhere that we, there we go. So it's up here. And we just simply export it. So I'm just going to make sure that we select the left eye, right eye. These are the copies I'm selecting, and that one, and then click on Go Z. Now you can see the poses come over nicely. The reason why the eyes haven't come over and been put into place is because you can see here in Modo that I haven't actually got the container folders for the left and right eyes. If I had, it would have actually went over there. So that's just something that you want to keep in mind. Once you've started to work between Go Z, ZBrush and Modo, then these folders automatically be set up, but I've obviously deleted it at some point. But you can clearly see here that the pose has come over, and not only has it come over, but any subdivisional levels that you may have will be applied to this pose. So then you can go ahead and start to sculpt over this. You can see I've got a bit of problem down here with the weighting, but that's something that we can easily deal with if we're just going for a sculpt. It can just be dealt with in seconds, so that's not a problem. And it kind of gives us a good start off, to create a nice sculpture. And there we go. That's how we work between ZBrush and Modo. And then we can store our poses and send them back to ZBrush at any time to work on the sculpt. Just bear in mind that when you clear that cache data, you're clearing that cache data not just for this, but I believe it would be for other projects. So be very careful when you do this. You can see here that it clears all the cache data. So you just got to be careful with that. So this concludes the video, and I hope that you found this useful and that, like me, you can move forward to trying different things out between ZBrush and Modo and the fantastic ACS kit. Looking at this video from a bigger picture point of view, what this basically means is you can create a one-off decent quality base mesh, something that you can use for male or female sculpts. You can use it basically to the point that when you've set up your rig and you finely tune those weights, you can get some really nice dynamic poses, especially for the fingers and hands, things that normally take quite a while when using transpose, I've found. Once you've done this, you can then use this rig over and over again, not just for animation, but for setting up some nice dynamic poses to do sculpts on within ZBrush. And of course, don't forget that within ZBrush, when this workflow is working well, when you've got the subdivisional history there, you're not always having to sculpt from scratch. You've always got some kind of base geometry there that you're working from. You may already have some skin pores set up, as an example, on the higher level, stored in a layer that you can apply after you've resculpted the mesh. So there's lots of possibilities that you can use to speed up your process and your creativity. So with that said, I'd like to thank you and bye for now.